Well, I'm excited to welcome today's guest, Dr. Alyssa Olenick. With a PhD in exercise physiology, her research dives deep into how training and nutrition impact women's performance, fat metabolism, and endurance capacity. She's a woman on a mission to bridge the gap between science and the fitness world, especially for women who have been underserved and oversimplified by bro science for far too long. Online, she's known as Doc Liz Fitness, and she just shares brutally honest, evidence-based content on training, nutrition, hormones, all of that good stuff that is going to help us improve our fitness, wellness, and nutrition. So, really excited to chat with Alyssa today. Let's welcome her to the podcast. Welcome to our podcast, Alyssa. And I want to start by asking you this question. What exactly are you on a mission to do?
I feel like I'm on a mission to, I don't know how to phrase this the right way. I'm somebody who actually gives a shit about people understanding why they should do what they do or why they shouldn't do certain things rather than just telling them, do this, don't do this, or using fear to sell. I know that's not a catchy tagline, um, but I feel like my mission is to actually help people understand why they are doing what they're doing rather than just chasing their tail on the next bit of hot take of do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, and never really understanding how to connect the dots to actually move the needle forward on their health and fitness or performance.
Yeah. What are you seeing on social that's frustrating you in that arena?
I just feel like there's just this constant back and forth right now of flashy viral hot take, misinformation that feels sexy and a simple solution because of pain points that people are struggling with. And then sometimes the only way to go about correcting that is this overcorrection of debunking. But then I feel like sometimes that doesn't actually help people know what to do with that new information or why it doesn't work. And I feel like there's this big gap of people wanting to be like, okay, but what do I do? Why do I do that? How do I do that kind of thing? And it's not that the overcorrection debunking is inherently wrong. We need that, right? We need people to be like, hey, you are wasting your time. That's not what you should be doing. That doesn't matter. But I think I see still so many people being like, okay, but then how do I do that? Why do I do that? What do I actually do then? So I feel like in order to help people move past that hot take, podcast clips, ironics of me being on a podcast, is we need to actually help teach them and understand and increase comprehension or baseline knowledge so that they can then go out into that and understand, okay, when I see that stuff, now I know why I shouldn't pay attention to it. Now I know why that doesn't work. Or now I understand why that might work but isn't not necessary kind of thing. They don't have the tools of knowledge to equip them to just not have to constantly be like sending a reel and saying, "Should I listen to this? Is this true? What do you think about this?" But having the skills to go, "Hey, you know what? I kind of know how to interpret this information moving forward."
Yeah. So, for an example, what we've seen a lot of, I'm sure you've seen this as well, is everyone should wear a weighted vest. Wear a weighted vest for bone density, wear a weighted vest for increasing lean muscle. And then some scientists are coming saying you actually don't need a weighted vest at all. That's not how we build muscle. That's not how we increase bone density. And so you're saying you're seeing both sides of that and you're going, okay, but who's explaining exactly what to do to build muscle or what to do to prevent this loss of bone mineral density? Is that
Yeah.
what you're getting at here?
Yeah, and it's not to say that correcting the bad information is wrong. I don't want it to come across because I do that too from time to time. You got to play in the algorithm, right? But what I see though is still so many people being like the frustration of like, well, what do I do? I'm busy. I don't have time. Seemed like a really good solution for me because I don't do these things kind of thing. And so helping people understand what to actually I feel like the biggest gripe with midlife women is this constant frustration, and I'm sure you can echo this, is I don't have time, I don't have resources, I don't have energy, I'm burnt out, I'm overextended, I have the weight of the world on my shoulders, so let me just add a weighted vest to it because that seems a lot easier than doing all the other things that I need to do, right? Um, but so I feel like I still see that gripe in comment sections, and I get it too on the things that I talk about. If I say you should do cardio, people are like, "How dare you? I don't even have time to sleep," right? And I'm like, "Well, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do cardio, but like, let's make it
Yeah.
practical and effective, right?" So I think that you could apply that to so many situations. But yeah, I think that there's still this gap of knowledge of like, there definitely are women who are strength training and they're like, yeah, I get it. I know. Okay, cool. But there's ones who are still not doing it and they don't understand what actual loading is. They don't understand what stress on bone or muscle is or why you need it or how it's different than just a 5 pound vest. They just think, oh, well, like this was told to me by someone practical and evidence based, and I trust them and they have credentials, but then you have credentials and you're telling me something different. So, how do I know what I should listen to? And I think that sometimes when you lead with evidence and or information so people can kind of draw their own interpretation and knowledge and assessment of it, it can help. Now, some people just want answers. They just want to be told what to do, yes, no, black and white, and they like that stuff. But I think there's a lot of people who still don't understand, well, if I shouldn't do it, why shouldn't I do it? Or what should I do instead? And how do I make that? I think the answer to most questions that people want answered is how do I actually make that work for me practically without feeling like I'm doing something more? Because putting a weighted vest on and going for a walk feels a lot easier than carving out 30 more minutes of your week to go do a gym training session, right? For so many people. And so I think that sometimes there's this disconnect, and I'm learning that and navigating it too, right? I get really frustrated at people in my own comment section. So this isn't me pointing fingers at anyone else. These are things that I'm learning in my science communication and sharing and things online of what people are actually asking or wanting answers and solutions for.
Okay, so let's talk about the weighted vest then. That is such a big, people ask me about it all the time as well. We actually used one years and years ago. I was training for this fem sport competition, which is kind of like Strong Women meets Tough Mudder. It's a local competition here in Canada. Anyway, we'd put on a heavy vest. We'd do step ups because we were training specifically for box jumps, so we wanted to get stronger in the step up. And then I didn't see weighted vests for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden, they sort of came back into the limelight. And so initially I put one on as well. Then I'm like, okay, what extra is this doing? We're resistance training anyway. So is it really necessary? Anyway, I'd love to hear your insight. Like, yeah, could someone wear it? Should they wear it? Is it necessary? Could we just do
Yeah.
resistance training instead?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to do this in a way that helps people put their pitchforks down because I think that there's this buy-in of people of doing things that when you then correct it or debunk it or try to say it's not worth their time, they get really offended because that bit of something felt realistic. It felt like the first step to change that maybe they're looking for. It felt like something that they could actually commit to. It was bite-sized enough that it felt practical. So I'm not here to him the haw of anyone of like if a weighted vest is your gateway drug to
Love it.
doing more
Yeah.
formal exercise, go for it. If that feels good, it motivates you, it gets you out the door. I mean, if wearing a clown suit does that, I don't care, right? Like that's the reality is if like that's what feels good to you, that's fine. I think the issue lies when women specifically, because that's who we're talking to here. It could be anyone, but women specifically think that that is a full replacement for the things that we know significantly drive forward the stimulus we need for bone or muscle health. So if you're doing it because you like it, because it feels good, because it motivates you, because it makes you feel like your workout's a little harder, and that feeling allows you to have a positive experience so you keep showing back up, that is fine. Like that is totally fine. I don't care. The issue is that women are wearing it to lift while they're lifting, which one, if you're using it as an accessory, so maybe you're adding weights to your pull-ups, your step-ups, your push-up, perfectly appropriate, perfectly fine, perfectly adequate. Like that's totally fine. I've had women when I've talked about this say, well, what if I use it because I can't hold as much weight when I'm lunging, but I want more weight or body weight squats? Great, amazing, because you're loading your body with more weight through a full range of motion and putting that stretch and pull on your muscles, which pulls on your bones, which can elicit the stimulus and growth we need of muscle and or bone in order to gain muscle mass or strength or stimulate bone to either maintain or build density, right? So that's different than when you're just wearing it to just walk and thinking it's going to replace those things. Can you do both? Sure, absolutely. Again, if you like it and it feels good to you, that's fine. I think the disconnect comes is that there are some studies that show that when participants wear the weighted vest, they had improvements in these markers or bone or muscle, but they're often doing it in conjunction with jump training or resistance
Right.
training. And they're
Yeah.
not in a control group on their own, or there's like the non exercise control altogether. And again, regular people don't understand how to read exercise science literature. That's not your job. But if no one's presenting it to you as, hey, it's not just weighted vest versus no exercise, it's weighted vest plus jumping. And we have all of these other studies that show that jumping or jumping plus resistance training together are strong stimuluses for bone density, which is what we're getting really sold to as for, I think, the biggest thing. Because a lot of women are scared about bone, and you should be concerned about your bone health. Absolutely. Like that is 100% totally worth your time to care about. Or muscle. But the issue comes when people think that that is an adequate replacement for doing nothing. Now, if someone's completely sedentary, doing absolutely nothing, or so detrained, that might be an adequate stimulus to start. And that is fine if that's where you're starting. But if you are, actively lifting resistance training in the gym, that is probably more than enough to do that. Or honestly, we have little trials on postmenopausal women doing 12 months of just small pogo hop training, like sets of 10 over the course of the year. And that has proved parameters in bone density. So even that is free to do that. That is totally free to do like 5 sets of 10 pogo hops. Start small, maybe just 1, 2 days a week, maybe 2 or 3 sets. And across the week, across the year, that is a free, easy intervention that you can do from home, that you can do before your lifts, that you can do in general, that doesn't require this, that might end up having a greater stimulus because bone needs that stress and reaction and that force in order to respond to the stress of training. Honestly, as much as I'm the cardio junkie girl and people know me as the endurance girl, like I don't like they're just the response of it to like endurance training or walking or especially cycling and swimming are really poor. But even walking, running, even though that is load bearing weight impact exercise, after the first few like steps, it's pretty small compared to that of the load and demand on the muscle tissue and bones of something like a weighted exercise and or jump training and that force being put onto the bone or muscle mass. So that is probably more worth your time. Or these studies are showing that when you're combining it with these things, it might be helpful. So if you want to have the takeaway of like, hey, I'm going to use a weighted vest and do jumping and lifting, that's fine. That's fine. That's totally fine. I don't care. If you're jumping and lifting, I don't really care if you want to shower in a weighted vest. If you know what I mean? Like if you want to do the dishes in the weighted vest kind of thing. I think the issue more lies in the fact that women are being sold that wearing a weighted vest, wearing wrist bracelets, wearing ankle weights is a replacement for the things that we know are making, magnitudes more of an impact on what they're looking at. So while these things might make 0.5% difference, maybe a 1% difference, I don't know. If we're just going to these might be making tenfold differences or more in the impacts of what we're seeing on your health. So hopefully that's nuanced enough for your audience so they understand that like, if you like it and it's motivating and you're doing it, great. If you feel good doing it, I don't care. Absolutely keep doing it. If you're using it as a tool for weight training or resistance training, amazing. But keeping in mind that unless you're just starting out, a lot of these vests that are like 4, 5, 6, 10 pounds, you should be progressing past in more than that over time. So if you're going to invest in one of these and use it as a weight training tool, maybe find one where you can add more weights to the pockets or modify and adjust it. Like if you're going to take your money, time, and resources on this and you want to train from home, great. Do that. Weighted jumps can be a thing that you can progress to even over time, although that's a little bit more intermediate to advanced. And I don't want to tell women to start jumping with their vest over time, because you could do that with dumbbells or barbells, and even that too, which is a little bit more athletic. That seems so foreign to the menopause guidance and recommendations. But honestly, if more menopausal women trained athletically, a lot of these things would self-correct for themselves across time anyway. But if you're using it as a whole replacement for these things, then that's where I think that's where the confusion lies because women are like, well, I just need something that I can do that's easy. And that I get that frustration and I feel so much sympathy for that. But when we're looking at these studies, they're either doing it in conjunction with those things or they're wearing them for like 8 hours a day or something like that. And so is that the same as a 30-minute walk with it? Probably not. And the big hemming the haw that I try to hold back on this because I know that it's really disheartening for people is like wearing a weighted vest can make your walking feel harder and that's not inherently a bad thing. But some of that like increased heart rate response to it, depending on how much weight you're doing, especially if you're thinking about like rucking or more moderate to higher loads, can just be like a disassociation between the stress of more load on your body versus like the VO2 or aerobic demands and cost of that activity. So you do, and that's amazing. If it makes your walking feel hard and you're walking more and you're more motivated to doing it, great. But it also might not be like a whole replacement for doing more specific aerobic activity, especially because you will adapt to that over time. And the goal with aerobic activity over time is to keep progressing past the phase of adaptation in what you're doing. So hopefully that was a nuanced enough breadth and depth of this for people so they can like, you want to do it, but make sure you're doing it informed and intentionally so that you can make the best decision for you, or that you're not doing something that you think is really significant for your health but might be distracting you from the thing that really moves the needle forward or has greater magnitudes of carryover to what you're actually looking to achieve.
I think that was brilliant. And the sad part about that is it's so hard to say that in a 30-second clip on Instagram, which is the problem
It
because
is
that was
so hard.
right. That was exactly what that's exactly what I think our audience needed to hear. I loved it. And what I heard too is, so often we'll hear a study, we'll take information in a silo as opposed to looking at the whole picture. And I love that you highlighted that. I also love that you highlighted just the importance of jumping as we age, especially. I've talked to my mom about this. She's 77 and she does this little circuit at her gym that she jumps over these little things. She's 77. I'm like, you have to jump, mom. Let's keep jumping. I mean, she's been fit, so she's incorporated this, after working her way up, of course. But yeah, I think that's so important. Let's go into cardio because I know that this is a big topic of conversation and teaching for you, and we'd love to get your insight on that.
Yeah.
So, could you tell us? As menopausal women, I think this is what we are hearing is that you have to lift weights, lift weights, lift weights. But so often it's at the exclusion of doing cardio. We're team both here at Move Daily.
Mhm.
I think both are crucial, and I do both in our online workouts. But yeah, let's get your insight and thoughts. What is cardio? What constitutes cardio?
Yeah. So it's so funny. I've become the cardio girl, but I'm like, if your audience is unfamiliar with me, if you're listening to this podcast, like just know that I am just like a 1 pound of muscle and power. Like I'm actually more strength and power than anything. But it's so funny. I've become the cardio girl. Um, because so much of my PhD and postdoc work was in metabolic health and or energy systems. So just for context for the audience here, like I'm so biased to both. But I've just become the cardio girl because there's so much information around cardio that is just completely wrong or like scares you out of doing cardio, which is incredibly important for metabolic health, especially for menopausal women who are at such a significant greater lifetime risk of metabolic disease and cardiovascular disease, which is why I think it's so harmful when this information is either neglecting cardio altogether or telling them don't do it because it's like making you fat or it's bad for you. So
Right,
cardio,
cortisol.
yeah, yeah. So cardio is essentially any sort of activity that is done continuously, rhythmically, and has enough of a stress on your system that's forcing oxygen uptake and an increased metabolic demand, which is a really fancy scientific way of saying something that's continuous in nature. So we're talking like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes, or it can be interval based depending on how it's set up. You have low intensity steady state, moderate intensity steady state, high intensity interval training or sprint interval training. But the biggest thing that makes something cardio is that it's a truly aerobic mode of fitness in nature. So walking, if it's done at a high enough heart rate, running, hiking, stair stepping, cycling, rowing, ski erg, swimming, dancing, things that are aerobic. So not necessarily like I did a bunch of stuff fast and hard that might have an aerobic stimulus or overlap with it. There's going to be overlaps with this all across the board, but something that's more cyclical and continuous and or just like single modal often or includes that as part of it to have that stress and strain on the body. So a lot of people often think that cardio is just straining your heart. It's just causing your heart to beat faster and that's what makes something cardio. And an increased demand on the heart and or heart rate is a part of the body's physiological response to doing cardio, but there's also this response that's happening in our muscles, and our muscles are our metabolism. I think that's a big disconnect that a lot of people are never taught, is that the way your body uses and makes energy and uses oxygen to make energy in carbs and fats from your diet and your body, like that's how we make energy for movement or just staying alive, happens in your muscle tissues during exercise. And so you want this stress that's specifically increasing blood flow and increasing the uptake of oxygen, and then using that to stress your mitochondria and your muscles in a way that result in aerobic adaptation in response. So that's typically why it's a single classic modal activity rather than like I just did a bunch of burpees and step ups at my local circuity gym and that was cardio. Is there an overlap there? Yeah, it's not inherently bad for you, but it's not true and strict cardio in nature. Versus even if we think about interval training, there are these really, really, really hard but short, acute, like sustained bouts of moderate or hard or very hard effort, and you're recovering between them so that you can repeat that. But it's an intentional stress on your metabolic systems, not just like I went hard and my heart rate was high and therefore that's cardio, which is where so much of this confusion lies. Now, my caveat here is if you just do a bunch of that fast moving stuff most of the time, and that's your way of getting in cardio because it's exciting, engaging, and interesting for you, you're probably meeting the physical activity guidelines. You're not going to have premature death and die early because that, like, you're probably fine. But some true classic cardio is really, really, really good for us to include in our training or just our lives in general when it comes to being just generally active.
So let's talk about why that is so important for us. What are some of the benefits of getting that true classic cardio in?
Yeah. So when we think about cardio, it specifically and differently stresses our muscles and bodies in a way that are different from strength training. There's two different pathways in our body that are being kind of like someone's ringing on the doorbell and saying, hey, go deliver this message. And they're resulting in different adaptations. So with lifting, we have increased either your neurons can contract your muscles more powerfully to produce more force and be better and stronger, or increasing more. I'm trying to say this in the most like regular way. Sorry, guys, if I'm hesitating a lot. I'm trying to be very, very lay terms with this to increase like protein turnover and to increase muscle fibers. So we grow muscle or hypertrophy or have more muscle mass. But when you're doing that with cardio, those little signals go through and say, hey, let's increase capillary density. So capillaries are like your little side roads that come off of the main highways, your veins, so that you're better at delivering blood flow and oxygen. They also are stressing those veins and those capillaries. We know that there's changes to the architecture, to the vascular system through perimenopause and postmenopause that can result in negative outcomes for cardiovascular disease. So stressing and straining your vascular system is important. And then having increased ability to use blood and oxygen and deliver that is a positive adaptation here. And then at the muscle cell level, you're getting better at taking up and delivering that oxygen, but also those little signals are increasing the number of mitochondria we have or how efficient they are at using oxygen and converting energy for us to use in our bodies. And that's really good and really important. So all these adaptations, also we have positive adaptations and stresses and strain in our heart, together can either help us reduce cardiovascular disease by stressing and straining the heart and the vascular system, which come together for cardiovascular disease. A lot of people forget that heart disease or cardiovascular disease is not just the heart, that can be part of it, but it can also be the vascular system playing a role in that. And we want healthy, stretchy, responsive veins. We don't want them to be stiff and not able to flux and move and be flexible. But also then we have the adaptations that happen within the mitochondria and the muscle that help us significantly with our metabolism, which can help with metabolic disease. So these positive adaptations make us better at using glucose and or being better at being fat burners or more fat oxidative, or if you ever heard the term metabolic flexibility. So that means that when you eat things or when you're exercising, your body's better at knowing how to respond to that. We call them stresses. I don't want to say stress and people think that like exercise or eating is bad, but it's a stress or a stimulus that's pushing your body out of homeostasis that has to respond to in order to adapt and respond. So somebody who's less metabolically efficient, maybe someone with type 2 diabetes and or insulin resistance, you're not going to be as responsive at using the glucose coming into your body or responding to insulin, or somebody who maybe has better cardiovascular fitness or better metabolic health, whether that's through increased muscle mass or improving the ability for your muscle and heart and vascular system to respond to these stresses and strains, the adaptations to that type of training help us get better at not needing as much insulin, taking up glucose on its own, burning fat and using fat, flipping between these two things, and or keeping lower blood glucose or lower blood triglycerides. Like these are positive adaptations that can occur to our health that happen as adaptations to that type of training. So I think a lot of people often think of exercise is just like, oh, movement I have to do, but they don't realize that fitness is actually like a health adaptation. Because what happens when you stress and strain your body, when you get fitter, you also get better at doing the things that keep you healthy. And that's why I really stress the point that yes, your heart and your vascular system are really important. We don't want to negate those. But the stress and strain on your muscle tissue makes you more metabolically capable, which also helps make you more metabolically efficient and or can reduce your risk factors of these diseases. And that's why my take is like build the car, the muscle, the with the strength training, but then add cylinders to your engine, your mitochondria, and or how efficient you are at doing things with the cardio. It's not either or, because we have positive adaptations that come from this too. With strength training, there's overlap. But the magnitudes of what you get with strength training are not as significant as what you get with cardio training on its own. And most literature shows that our adaptations for health or fitness or stuff in general is best when they're combined together. So the reason that I think that it's so bad that we're telling menopausal women or perimenopausal women to just forgo cardio for strength training is often coming from the fact that most women have overused and abused cardio their entire life versus they need to add in or swap some of that out for strength training. I 100% agree with that, right? But I think a lot of the times too, women just overdid cardio as a sake to expend calories and be thinner or lose weight. And they never thought about it being structured and intentional and recoverable or like specific to what we're trying to do to adapt. Now, everyone listening here who just wants to be healthy doesn't have to have these specific cardio protocols, but doing a little bit of it can help you and it doesn't need to be incredibly time consuming. We just want to stress and strain those pathways in a way where they go, okay, I'll respond, and we can become more efficient at that, and that can have positive outcomes for our health.
Let's talk about some of the protocols then that a woman in menopause could follow to potentially get these benefits that you're speaking about. We hear a lot about zone 2. We hear some about VO2 max. I include both of those in our online workouts, but what is the protocol that could really benefit us following this routine here?
Yeah, so a quick like summary for your audience listening. When we talk about zones and intensity and exercise, typically there's this 5 zone model. And zone 1 is like really easy, lower effort stuff. And honestly, transparently, the exercise guidelines suggest that as long as you're exercising at greater than 50 to 60% of your heart rate max, that can count, which is technically zone 1 for a lot of people. So like, don't be deterred that it only has to be high and hard intensity when I get to that. And then zone 2 is roughly 60 to 70%. Now, that's not always concrete for every person. The less fit you are, the lower that heart rate will be, or the smaller your zone 2 will be. So you'll kind of get knocked out of zone 2 really easily. So I think people also get frustrated with that because they can't stay in it. And then you have zone 3, which is more moderate intensity in nature. And then you go into zone 4, which is more harder but sustainable intensities and exercises. At this point, you're essentially accumulating more lactate more rapidly than you can clear it. You're not as good at using oxygen. So it's a little bit more of a stressful metabolic expenditure, costly exercise. And then you have zone 5, which is like really hard, really intense, really just about sub-maximal to maximal efforts. And then we have super maximal efforts. So greater than that, like sprinting or really high power output type activities, which are technically like zone 5 plus when we're thinking about that. So I just want to give like a really brief zones recap for your audience here so they know like what I'm talking about with certain things.
Sure.
And so zone 2 training is essentially continuous, repetitive. We're thinking like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 plus minutes of continuous cardio activity. That's great and that's good. It's not bad for you. It's not making you fat. It's not killing your gains. It's not wrecking your hormones. Women can do zone 2. Like that isn't the issue. And zone 2 isn't special. It's really only special if people are doing really high volumes of cardio training. So if you're somebody who's exercising 3, 5, 7, 10 hours a week, maybe you're an endurance athlete, maybe you really want to maximize your health, you want to go to the upper ends of the exercise guidelines to 300 to 500 minutes a week of cardiovascular activity, You might need a zone two because zone two lets you do volume without being really fatiguing and or anything like that. So if you're somebody who is doing a lot of cardio training, or you're maybe a runner or a cyclist or an X-endurance athlete, you're going to have to do more zone two because you can't do everything intense all the time and recover. Similarly, if you're just starting out with cardio, it might feel more accessible for you to start with lower intensity cardio until you feel either comfortable or confident or metabolically capable to move into these higher efforts. I think so many people get the advice in menopause of you have to sprint and you have to do
I
HIIT, but
know.
they haven't been
Yeah.
doing any cardio at all. And if you jump to 3 sprint interval training sessions a week, you're gonna
Yeah.
feel terrible. It's gonna be hard. You don't have the baseline fitness for that. And some of that easy aerobic stuff builds the base. So that way, when you do those hard things, you can either go harder or recover better between those bouts. So, if you're just starting out with cardio, don't feel like, I think there's so many women who are like, if I did sprints 3 days a week, I can't handle it. My body feels run down. I feel worn out, especially with peri and postmenopause, where sometimes recovery is impacted and we have to space things out or balance hard with easy. And that's where Zone Tool is an amazing tool for this. For when you're just starting, you're just gaining fitness, you're filling in the gaps with extra time or more time of training each week. Or if you can't handle the hard and high intense multiple days a week, well, you can only do it 1 or 2 days a week, then fill in the rest. Maybe you're doing a long hike on the weekends. Maybe you're taking your dog on a more intensive walk. Maybe you're, I don't know, like you are intentionally doing a steady state bike on the weekends or whatever to fill in the gaps of time. Like whatever that looks like for you, it's a tool, but it's not magical in itself. And if you're not doing a lot of cardio or a lot of training each week, that's where intense but less time can really come in handy. So I typically tell people, if you're exercising just at the exercise guidelines of 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous or hard exercise per week, do not worry about what zones you are doing. Just get in that cardio. But as you get closer to like the 300 minutes per week and above, that's where you're probably going to have to start, thinking about making some more easy. And my personal bias is if you have the time, resources, availability, or desire, doing a mix of both is probably best. It's good to have a combination of these stresses and stimuluses on our body. But if you're only going to do anything, do some intensity, right? Like if you're only going to do a little bit of anything, do some intensity. And so when I talk about intensity, I mean high intensity interval training. So things that are 1 to 4 minutes in duration with usually about like a 1-to-1 rest ratio. So like 1 minute on, 1 minute off is a great example of something that's really easy for people to start with. And you could start with like 3 to 5 rounds if you're not, super fit, and build up or even have experienced this. When I say not super fit here, guys, I'm not saying that like you're worthless. I just mean like you might not have the capacity to handle more, and that's fine. I just tend to always say like people like less fit is just very objective to me. But if you can handle more, you can increase it over time to like 6 to 8 rounds or 10 rounds of 1 minute on, 1 minute off. It's a brutal workout that's 20 minutes long, right? Similarly, you can do 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off. Or we have the classic 4x4 protocol. A lot of people tout as being perfect for VO2 max of 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. There's good data to back that. I used 4 minutes on, 3 minutes off in my dissertation studies. That's really hard. And if
Yeah.
you do through 2, 3, 4 rounds of that it's hard. It's really hard.
So hard. Yeah.
It sincerely is to maintain that effort. And those efforts for HIIT are probably going to fall in that zone 4-ish to maybe zone
Mhm.
5-ish range if you guys are thinking about like how hard that is. And with that, you can think about like heart rate and RPE, rating of perceived exertion effort, because it will catch up to that. So somewhere exercising probably above like 80, 85 to 90% of your heart rate max is where you're going to fall with that, or somewhere between like a 7 or 8 out of 10 effort for those bouts and intervals, give or take. And those are great. And start with less and build to more. And more is not always better, right? Like 4x4 rounds of 4 minutes is really hard. And it's not a long workout, but it can be really efficient and effective. Similarly, but different, we have sprint interval training, which HIIT and sit are like sister and brother. They're both hard interval training, but they're not always exactly the same. And sprint interval training is great. And I think that gets pushed the most to menopausal women because sprint interval training is a little bit more power output driven. You're doing really hard, all out intense bouts of essentially maximal or above maximal effort of like when I say sprinting, you guys, I don't want people to think I'm saying like you need to go run sprint or you have to run for HIIT. Most people, if you're not run trained, I think the best way to do this is like if you have access to an air bike or an echo bike, That is the most brutal, brilliant way to get this in. But you can do it on a rower, you can do it on a skier, you could do it for most people if you don't have like the form for a lot of things where you can efficiently push really hard, just do a stationary bike. Like just a stationary bike can be really effective for this when you're doing it. It doesn't have to be sprinting in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to run as hard as I can. And this can be anywhere from 10, 20 to 30 seconds of maximal all out efforts. And then you are resting for like 90 seconds, a minute and a half to 2 minutes. It's not like really hard, quick recovery, really hard again. It's really, really, really hard. And then a full rest. You can almost think about it the way that we approach strength training is you do a really hard set. It takes 30 seconds to do, and then you rest 2 minutes before you do it again. It's similar in nature to that because you're stressing your body. It like these really short, quick bursts of energy that don't use oxygen, but are really, really high intense strains and stressors on your body that then you need full recovery to be able to repeat that again. But this is really hard and really intense. And that's why I'm like, if you aren't trained at all and you just start doing this, can you do it? Yeah, but are you going to feel terrible, defeated, maybe never want to do it again? It's really hard. Like, it's okay to start with less. I think that there's this idea that if menopausal women are not doing HIIT or sprints, that they're hurting their health, they're not maximizing their health. If you're weight training and doing plyometrics, you're getting so many of those type 2 muscle fibers and power and muscle output preservations already in your training that whatever cardio that you're willing to do on top of it is great. We do have some amazing studies on high intensity interval training or sprint interval training in this population, especially with the idea of like, if you're not going to strength train at all, maybe you can maintain some of that power output and or strength that you need because it's a little bit more strength demanding in nature than say zone 2. And there does seem to be positive adaptations for metabolism, body composition, things like that in this population. So these are great. Honestly, if you're short on time, you aren't doing anything else. If you're just weight training, walking a bunch or just being active across your days and doing some HIIT or sprint 2 or 3 days a week, that's fine. Minimum effective dose, that's totally fine. And what we see is that you can get away with less overall volume, which volume is a really important component for overall adaptations to cardio with the sprint interval training because the stress and stimulus is so high and so hard. That's why it's really touted or marketed as like the effective short on time mode of fitness because it is. You can get a lot of benefits because the stress of it is so high, but it's really hard and it has to truly be at those efforts to get that. And most people aren't going to push themselves to their efforts, especially at first. Does that mean that it's ineffective? No, but it has to be at those really hard efforts. I think high intensity interval training is more realistically where people are going to be the target of the stimulus of what they're doing. And I think that's also really great for getting a little mix of volume because volume is an important component of training and or high and hard intensity that if you're short on time or you're trying to get the most bang for your buck, I think yes, doing maybe 2 hard days of cardio on top of your strength training and power and walking a bunch because I know people want walking to be cardio and exercise and it can be for people if your heart rate's high enough, but sometimes I like to think of it as just like general daily activity that's filling in the gaps between this, but that doesn't make it bad. And so I think when people want like a realistic guidance for exercise, I'm like, if you can only work out a few days a week, doing 2 days of strength training that includes jumping, hopping, skipping, 2 days of hard, high intensity or sprint interval training, and then walking a bunch or filling in zone 2 or general daily activity or hiking or other activities that you enjoy and add value to your life and involve movement within that, amazing. Like if you spend 3 hours gardening on Saturday, that's great physical activity and that contributes positively to your health. It doesn't have to be in a gym-based setting, but you don't have to be like living in the gym if you want these benefits. But those are like, if we only have to think about, I think a lot of people struggle with exercising more than 3 or 4 days per week. And I think those are really easy minimums to target there that account for all of those things. But the cardio can depend on who you are, how much time you have, your goals, the fitness level that you're bringing to it, what you actually want to do, and what you're wanting to get out of it. The only thing that I would say is that if you're short on time, make it more intense. If you're not doing a bunch, make it more intense. If you're not strength training a ton and really cardio is all you're willing to do, definitely make it intense. But if you are getting most of the strength, power, hypertrophy, muscle training benefits from lifting, it's okay to make your cardio whatever you want it to be. And it's also okay if you guys are making it circuit training or boot camps or group fitness. If that social accountability is huge for a lot of people, I'm not against it, but I do think that there's this misinformation and assumption that doing like a really hard interval of like kettlebell swings or burpees is sprint interval training. And it's hard and that's good for you. And it might have an aerobic component, but it's not the same because you can't get your stress on your muscles and that oxygen cost isn't exactly the same as with HIIT or sprint training. So while those things can be fine, and if that's all you're doing as a way to get in a cardio stimulus, that's fine. Like you're probably going to reduce your risk of health. That's amazing for social connection. I don't want people to walk away from this being like, well, what I'm doing isn't good enough. That is never my goal here as a communicator. But understanding the differences between them, and especially when people are marketing and talking about why HIIT and sprint interval training is good for menopausal women, it's because in the studies, they are doing strict aerobic exercise. Usually the bike is what most people are doing because that's easier. Any population can use a bike. It's not doing like 1 minute max burpees, 1 minute max kettlebell swings, 1 minute max step up, 1 minute max bike, repeat. But does that mean that that workout's inherently bad? No, there's an aerobic stimulus to it. That's totally fine to do. It just, again, depends on your goals within it. But I never want, it's kind of like when menopausal women are told you must lift heavy or else, and then that stops them from starting lifting. Start with the cardio that feels accessible, that you're willing to do. Even if that's walking with a weighted vest, if that's what's getting you out the door, go for it. Start with the intensity that feels accessible and enjoyable. And then you can get specific if you have specific goals or if you're trying to go above the minimums to like maximize your health benefits of what you're doing or more moving towards specific outcomes with like performance or whatever that looks like.
I really appreciate you saying all of that. And I know your brain just was probably going a million miles a minute to get to tell us all of that, but I think it's so important. So thank you so much for that explanation. I think, we'll watch on social and a lot of people are presenting the optimal way, to improve health. And I think it's challenging because maybe that's their audience, but a lot of women are seeing it, and women at the very start of their fitness journey. And so yes, they hear these things, it seems overwhelming, they try it, they can't show up again tomorrow because they're so sore or depleted or defeated, trying these different elements. And so you really painted such a wonderful picture of how you can optimize, but also that the goal is always to be able to show up again tomorrow. Right. So we start low, we start light, we work our way up. And then if you want to begin to eventually optimize, here are some of the protocols that you can begin to include. So well done, girl. That was
Thank
such a good
you.
explanation. I loved it. I
Thank
loved
you.
it. Let's just look at even fasted and cardio. We hear about it a lot about should we train fasted? Should we not? What does it do to our cortisol levels? Can you speak to what that looks like if we're doing cardio first thing in the morning?
Yeah. So I'm of the bias that fed is always going to be better, simply not even because of hormones and cortisol. You're going to have more power output, you're going to have more energy, you're going to have a better workout, you're going to be, you're just going to have glucose available for you to do the activities that you need. But there's some caveats here. So again, I'm sorry you guys got the nuance, girl. One, if you're just exercising just to exercise and move, and the only thing you could do is roll out of bed in the morning, get to your gym for 20 to 30 minutes and do what you need to do, and you're fasted and that works for you, and that's the only way you're getting it in, you are fine. You're not going to die. You're not going to destroy your body, your health, or your hormones. That exercise that you're doing is more of a net positive overall than anything else that you would be doing otherwise. Two, being fasted before resistance training probably won't impact it as much as cardiovascular training because you're just not using as much blood glucose or depleting it as much with the resistance training as you are with cardiovascular training. Does that mean that having a little bit of carbs in your body will hurt you? No, absolutely not. But if you are somebody who is running or doing endurance training, especially if it's getting over that like 30, 40, 45 to closer to like 45, 60 or plus mark, I really recommend taking in some carbohydrate at least in the morning before that. Um, I also think that in general, it doesn't hurt to have some amino acids available in your body if you can get some protein in. But if you're not, it's not, again, get it in after. It's not the end of the world. What you get in a whole day period matters most, right? But the timing of things matters more if you have more specific goals. So if you're just, hey, I'm exercising for health and fitness, and this is the only way that I get up and get out of bed, I'm not even maximizing my potential in my fitness, you're probably going to be okay. And that exercise is more of a net positive. If you're doing longer in durations of exercise or high intensity training or cardio training or some sort of cardiovascular stimulus, you might want some carbs. You probably will feel better and perform better. And or if you have specific performance goals, I do think being fed is probably more advantageous. But here's the thing, and I think this is where the fed conversation gets really lost for a lot of women, is they think when you say you need to eat something or you should eat something or I suggest you eat something before exercise, that they need to get up at 3 a.m., have 2 eggs, toast, a bowl of cereal, a bowl of oatmeal, 3 glasses of juice, digest for 6 hours, wait, go to the
Right.
gym, and they can't tolerate it. You can have, I mean, like as simple as like a couple graham crackers, some applesauce packets, a glass of chocolate milk, a glass of orange juice. Like if you follow me on Instagram, I always joke where like my sometimes I straight up before a run in the morning just take a gel or a goo with me on my run if I don't have time to eat. This summer, it's been so hot and humid and terrible in the mornings that I haven't had as much time to like eat, digest, which I prefer to do and feel so much better doing. So I have been doing a lot more like fasted runs, and the ones that I've done 100% fast, I will tell you, I feel horrific. I feel horrific. And I sit there and I think, why do people want to do this? But like on those runs, often I will straight up just take a gel or goo or sports nutrition with me. And again, that's for our more endurancey folks, regular Gen Pop people. You don't need to go buy goos for your morning workouts. But the point is that if you can't eat before, you can eat during if you need to. If that makes a pack of fruit snacks, an applesauce packet, whatever that looks like for you. Or you don't need to have this full high digestion breakfast. It can just be a little bit of like a carby snack, and then you need a full breakfast afterwards, making sure you're hydrated. Like I think that's where the disconnect come from because people think that they have to have a full meal and digest it before you exercise. I'm like, you can shotgun an applesauce packet while you're walking into the gym and just have some because your glycogen stores, especially in your liver, get depleted overnight because you're fasted overnight. And it doesn't hurt to give you a little bit of hydration and carbs to help you get going. But again, there's nuance. And so I will plug for your audience here. I have done recently two like more research heavy deep dive podcasts, one on fasted versus fed exercise for women. There's a lot of stuff on like menstrual cycle type stuff in that too, because that's where it can be more stressful because of the energy deficits that we're getting depending on the person and the athletic level. And I also have one on building bone and bone density, more so talking about like muscle and or sorry, lifting and jumping and like intensities of that. But if your audience wants deeper dives on this, I have done those recently on my podcast. I also have one on like exercise training for menopause, not to just like shove you guys all into my audience, but like I know that we're surface level covering a lot of these things, and there's some
Yeah.
nuance and deeper levels to those things if they want to
Sure.
dive in more. But that's the way I think about it. It's like, what's your intention with the workout? How much, like, where do you fall on the spectrum of like general exercise to performance? And then, like, what's the duration of the activity that you're doing? But fasted exercise isn't destroying your hormones, and cortisol is elevated in this menopausal state, which might contribute to things like visceral adipose tissue and all that stuff, and blah, 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 blah. If you're overly stressed and chronically stressed and always on your frizzled ends of life, that is more of an issue than necessarily the fasted exercise. But like, that doesn't mean that hard exercise on top of that can't compound that or contribute to making that, heightening that. But exercise is typically a net positive. It makes us more stress resilient. And as long as you're eating enough across your day, getting enough of protein in across your day, eating adequately for your performance needs or levels or activity needs across the day, you're probably going to be okay. So hopefully that nicely covers that for your audience kind of thing. Do what you want, but if you're doing
Yeah.
it longer, more intense, or more specifically, consider eating before. It's kind of my general rule of thumb.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about like really consider what your top goal is, right? Because it's going to be different for everyone based on what your targets are. Just one final question here before we finish off. I'd love to know what you see as some of you probably work with a lot of women. What do you see as the most common self-limiting belief that women have? And then how do you help them move past that?
I feel like for me, women fall into these very different buckets. But I think that the one that resonates the most with your audience is this constant feeling that like they aren't capable or able to do a thing, whether that's physically or it's feeling like they can't do it on top of everything else that they're doing or fitting that into their life and or putting too much pressure on themselves to do it perfectly before they do it. And so this is a big reason why I love performance goals for women, because I think performance goals separate us a little bit. Now, not fully, because there's so much overlap and nuance here, but separate us from just like, how can I be skinnier, thinner, leaner, more attractive? But what can my body do? But also then allows us to indirectly do a lot of the things that work for health and fitness and body composition within that. But it allows women to do things that's hard outside their comfort zone, challenges them, and forces them to get a little bit uncomfortable and trust their bodies and themselves. I think we've used fitness as such an exercise of like manipulating and forcing or changing our body for so many years, especially the women in your age group and population. Not to say that isn't true for women my age either, but I know that that's a huge thing for them, is like exercise their whole lives was just like, how do I be 90s thin, right? Like you hear that all the time. But I think that like women think that like these big goals or these big specific things aren't for them. And big can be relative to you. Maybe that's you running your first mile, not running a marathon. Maybe that's you back squatting your body weight, not winning a powerlifting meet. Like that, those things don't have to be impressive or elite for it to be something for you. But I really think that so many women think that like goals or fitness or these lifestyles aren't for them. And I think some of that comes from the narrative of making it seem so overcomplicated. But like a fit, healthy life can be a lot more simple and done with a lot less perfection and or achievable for you, or you are able to do hard things that are outside your comfort zone or what you think you are capable of at any age. There is not a limit. I have clients in their 50s who are running their first marathons, or I have clients who are lifting for the first time ever. And like I have this one client, I love her. She's like nearly 60. She deadlifts in her basement and can like rep out 250 pounds. And when she started with us, she was like using the barbell. You know what I mean? So it's like these things aren't unachievable for you. You're not broken, but you don't have to be perfect to do these things. Like you can imperfectly find your way to doing hard things and challenging yourself or living this fit, idealized life that people are selling to you with a lot less mental chaos than you're trying to make it. So hopefully
Yeah.
that was a lot of things, but like those are
Yeah.
what I see.
For sure. Doing hard things is, I say that all the time, like throughout workouts and toward the end, we're always talking about challenging yourself. But I think I had Dr. Eric Helms on, and we talked about if people grew up being pushed by a coach or in a team sport or even in an individual sport, they'll often really know how to push themselves, how to challenge themselves. And so they can, as adults, then throughout a workout, really know how to
Mhm.
set the bar and then rise to the occasion. I think if people haven't done that in their life, it is more of a challenge, right? That
Yeah,
I
no,
think they
absolutely.
leave so much in the tank. They just don't know what they're capable of. They don't push themselves. They don't challenge themselves. And so I like what you said about even setting those performance goals. I also had Caroline Miller on. We talked about setting learning goals versus performance goals, because sometimes, and you've alluded to this throughout your whole talk here today, is that sometimes you're brand new to the game. And so sometimes we need to just learn what to do safely, maybe hiring a coach, maybe working with you, working with us,
Yeah.
and really spending time learning before you set those big performance goals, because otherwise you get overwhelmed, you can't show up again tomorrow, and then no one is winning.
Yeah, I often find myself telling a lot of people, especially because there's again, I talk to two different buckets of people. I talk to the people like me who have been athletes their whole life. They have athletic goals, they're pretty specific, they want to take that level up. But then you see the people over here who are seeing that information and then they're so overwhelmed. Narrow in your put your blinders on, narrow in your view, start with less. I love telling people start with less. And also, I think for a lot of women, there's this fear of being a beginner and not being good at something when you start right away.
Yeah.
Embrace being a beginner, embrace learning. Don't be distracted by the stuff that comes a year or two down the road, right? Just focus on what you need to do. Maybe that's getting comfortable just being in the gym and being in that environment, or just using the barbell, not even putting weights on it, not even doing a workout with it, just going and exposing yourself and getting comfortable and confident within that kind of thing. I totally agree and I love that. And I also love the note of what Helm said about the beginner thing. My friend Austin Current talks about this a lot too, is that a lot of people who don't have that athletic past, they
Mhm.
don't know when you say RPE, they think what is actually their three is a six. because they've never taken a set to failure or they've never ran till they wanted to basically puke their guts out. Now, I'm not telling your audience to do that, but like
No, I
if you
know.
haven't pushed to that level, I was an athlete, I'm still an athlete, right? My pain tolerance and my discomfort tolerance is stupid, right? I can just tell myself to shut up and go hard no matter what it feels like, even if I don't want to do it, because I've done it for 20 years. That is so different than if you've never been to a gym. Don't expect yourself to be able to max out or do the hardest thing on the day one or even the sprint interval training stuff. Like you're probably not going to push hard enough on that first workout, but like that doesn't mean it's worthless. But learning how to do that, I think is really, really valuable because I think so many women get so frustrated because they're not seeing results in the gym. And it's because they feel like they're pushing themselves. Just like with all the lifestyle behavior stuff, they feel like, because work feels like work, whether the work is effective or not, right? So it feels like you're doing a lot and you are doing a lot and trying, like give yourself grace, but you can get more from what you're doing if you keep the quality higher. But that doesn't mean go max out next week. It means just challenge yourself to feel what that feels like to actually push yourself. That's the first step, I think. And then you're going to get more muscle gains, more strength, more body composition changes because there's more of a systemic stress of what you're getting. And then you're like, oh, this is working. Because going through the motions 3 days a week is a lot different than going through it intentionally.
Right. And then we build self-efficacy, which is one of the greatest predictors of exercise adherence. So start light, folks, work your way up and stay in the pocket. Alyssa,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being my guest today. You are such a powerhouse. Please follow her over on Instagram because her content is so engaging, so inspiring. I love it. I love what you're doing over there.
Thank you
Could
so
you
much.
tell people, you're welcome. Could you tell people where they can follow you and then also tell us about your podcast as well?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on Instagram at Dockless Fitness, and then my YouTube's actually got a lot of really amazing content at Dockless Fitness as well. And the one thing I'll tell your audience here is I think sometimes menopausal women conflate content that doesn't say like for menopausal women as not being for them. Most of what I talk about, the science behind cardio, lifting, strength, power, plyometrics, it applies to you too. There aren't these like menopause specific differences that we often are looking for. I get that asked a lot. I'll say, is your programs for menopause? Is this advice for menopause? Does this count for menopause? And most of the time, 98% of it does. So I just always give that caveat to menopausal women that like just because it doesn't say it's for you doesn't mean it's not for you. So if you're diving into my content on cardio and you're like, does this apply to me? It does. So just take that with like that grain of salt. But mostly Dockless Fitness on Instagram and YouTube. My podcast is called The Hybrid Lab. Um, it used to be called The Messy Middle, so you might see like some cross names of that on labeling on things. But honestly, if you just go to my Instagram, you'll find links to all of the things. And all those podcast episodes are also on my YouTube that I recently referenced in this as well. So those are great places to start for learning a little bit more as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I had a 37-year-old message me this morning too, and she's like, even though I'm not in menopause, can I do this workout? Will it be beneficial? So vice versa with what
Yes,
you
yes,
said there.
exactly.
Yeah. So I'll link all of that in the show notes below that Alyssa referenced there. So be sure to follow her, check those links out, check out some of those deeper dives into the videos. Keep learning, everyone. And as always, go move daily in your fitness, wellness, and nutrition. And we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.